welcome to another episode of Rob Bilk. I'm your host, Rob Bilk. You know, pretty early on in my real estate career, I ran out of a very important thing that was needed, and that important thing was money. Should I do the whole intro with the knife? You know, one of the stats on YouTube is like, what percentage of people stuck around in your intro? And so I was wondering if having a knife would keep you engaged. Hopefully you didn't feel like a captive audience, but here we are. As I was mentioning earlier, very early on in my real estate career, I was starting this Airbnb thing, and very quickly I was out of money. And when you have no money, it's hard to progress in the world of Airbnb. So I quickly started to realize the importance of partnering up with others and using OPM, a very key principle that you should learn early on, the concept of other people's money and how to use it and how to use debt to structure your portfolio so that hopefully you can scale from $0 to $10 million too. There really is no right or wrong, right? I'm always gonna say that. There's only what's right for you and the partner that you're working out the terms with, okay? So I'm gonna start with probably the most fundamental partnership that I ever did starting an Airbnb. And that's basically this concept of you fund it, I run it. I also say you're the bankroll, I'm the brains. So in this instance, you work with someone that's really curious, that wants to get into real estate and the financing oftentimes. That's how I structure a lot of my deals getting started. And you're basically bringing the sweat equity. So this is a really interesting way to get into real estate with low to no money down. So effectively, here's how I worked it out with different sets of partners. Again, there are so many variations on this specific strategy or technique, so you'll have to customize it based on your preferences. So a potential partner would approach me and they would say, hey Rob, I see that you're doing this Airbnb thing. I'd like to get into Airbnb. I've got capital, but I have no idea how to do this. And they knew that I had several successful short-term rentals. That's why they were coming to me. So I would say, great, here's what we're gonna do. I am gonna help find the property. I'm gonna find the realtor. I will help you even find the loan officer. I will work through the entire process of making sure that questions are answered during the loan process, that the communication with the real estate agent never lapses, and I'll be analyzing the deal to make sure that it pencils out and makes us money in the long run, right? That's an important aspect of having a successful partnership. So in this instance, the partners were the ones that were also bringing the borrowing power and the capital. So for me, my job was to run the entire property and teach them how to do this. And so hopefully, they didn't have to partner up with me again. They could go off and do this on their own. This was a really good deal for me back in the day because I effectively got a free house for teaching people how to start a short-term rental business. So remember, I talked about variations to this. Here's how I originally structured this deal with my first sets of partners. I would say, hey, I'm gonna run this property and it's gonna cash flow, and I'll actually never take a profit from this property until you're paid back 100%. And so this sort of alleviated the idea of like, well, what happens if I buy the house and you don't do your job and you kind of suck at it and blah, blah, blah. I would say, hey, no, I'm gonna do my job. I'm gonna make sure that this property absolutely crushes it because I want you to get paid back as soon as possible, because when you get paid back, I start taking the paycheck. And I think this is a really good show of faith. While I didn't necessarily have skin in the game, I did have this sort of carrot dangling that the more I crushed it with this property, the faster I could actually start making money for it. If it was a 25% cash on cash return, for example, I wouldn't really ever get a paycheck from this property for 4 years. Now, luckily for that property, it was like a 93% cash on cash return in the first year. Those partners actually got all their money back the first year, which is really, really cool. So now I finally get to dip into the profits and get a paycheck from that property. But I had to work for it in a long time, and I had to deal with a lot of cranky guests, and I had to deal with bears breaking into my house, and I had to deal with bears eating my hot tub cover.
Now it's trying to eat the filter. Okay, all right.
All that kind of stuff for a while before I got to see the fruits of my labor. Now, the other variation to this, which I honestly wish I would have negotiated in at the time, but again, any deal is a good deal to me at that time. You could also negotiate like hey, you get the cash flow right away, but I am gonna charge a small management fee to run this property, right? Because then at the very least, 2 years if I'm running this property, if I was charging a 7 to 10% management fee, at least I could make a little bit of money for having to work so hard because, running a short-term rental business is really tiring, but it's even more tiring when you're not making any money, right? From a logistical standpoint, since these partners were on the title of the property, we created an LLC, and that's how we formed our partnership. I'm not gonna give any advice there because I'm not a lawyer. I don't know if you know this about me. I'm not legally certified to give you legal advice. That all makes sense. Yeah, so go talk to your lawyer about it. But a few different ways to structure that partnership. So something I want to bring up about this is that I just want you to make sure that you're sort of taking future you into consideration when you make a deal like this. This was a very good deal for me starting out, right? I mean, it's amazing. I got a couple free houses doing it this way. But the really hard part about these deals is that I went on to really explode my portfolio. The partners ended up going and buying more short-term rentals as well. But not only did my portfolio explode, but I started the Rob Bilk channel and I became the bigger Pockets co-host, and then I created a whole education company, Host Camp, and I have all these different businesses that actually take up a significant amount of my time. And so now I'm managing this property over here for free. And so I wasn't really ever considering that I would be a very successful real estate investor. And so it's actually a little tougher for me to manage this one property. This was a partnership that I got into, and again, really good deal for me at the time. Still a good deal for me now, but it does require more attention from me because I entered into this partnership where my expectation was to perform. So no matter how much my empire grows over here, I still got to bring it over here, right? So to be honest, I'm not sure that's something that you can predict or plan for, but it is something I want you to keep in mind. Like if you're in the mindset of like, I'm going all in on real estate and I'm gonna do this thing forever, maybe just consider paying yourself a management fee. I think that's sort of what I'm getting at. Like if I was getting paid a little bit of money of a management fee, then all the late night calls and all the bear calls and all that kind of stuff wouldn't necessarily be so tough. So let's talk about the second way that you can do this. As I began to sort of graduate, I didn't necessarily like the idea of never getting paid. Started to realize this after doing it a couple of times, right? So I worked out what's called the waterfall. This is a very common term and strategy when you're paying back your investors. This was like the 75-25 model, right? So we'd go to an investor, we would say, hey, we want 50% equity, we want 50% of the cash flow, we want you to finance it. That investor, most of the time was gonna say, hey, if I'm paying for it and it's in my name, you have no risk. Why would I do this? Like you could always walk away at any time, whatever, right? And I would say, well, I'm putting in all this work. I'm the one that's getting it launched. I'm the one that's furnishing it. I'm the one that's doing all this, right? So it actually is a significant amount of my time to get into this property. So what I would propose to the investor so that, everybody was happy, since I wasn't bringing any cash to the deal, is I would say, look, here's what we'll do. We'll do a 75%, 25% split on the cash flow, all right? And then we'll do a 50-50% split on the equity. I would own a 50% stake in that property. Now, the investor would get 75% of the profits. I would get 25% of the profits up until the investor got paid back fully. And once that investor got their initial investment back, then we would split cash flows 50-50. Now you can also work it out in the back end. I mean, the paperwork gets pretty granular if you do this, but you can also work that same waterfall split out with the equity too, right? If the investor doesn't want to give you equity right out the gate, you can work it out to where you get 25% stake in the property, 25% cash flows up until that investor is paid back. Then effectively your other 25 vests and you become a 50% partner equity holder officially. And that's another way that you could structure this type of deal. Now, what's interesting about this 75-25 split is that there's actually other ways that you can do this, because we would actually walk into certain deals where the investor, weirdly enough, did not necessarily care about the cash flow. They wanted the equity. They wanted the upside, right? They didn't want us to walk into this deal, own it for 5 years, and then the house doubles in value, and now we just got all this equity for having basically been a glorified property managers. It's kind of like some of the objections that we would hear. That was fine. Like for us, we're always in the mindset of like, hey, we're gonna kill it, and by killing it and bringing value to the partner, we're gonna get a free house out of it, right? So another way that we would structure this is we would say, all right, obviously you care about the equity, you care about the appreciation. So we would actually work out to where they own 75% of the equity of the home, we own 25% of the equity of the home, but we get 75% of the cash flow, 75% of the profits, and they get 25%. So we'd sort of like flip-flop, right? And the reason was they wanted the equity in the home so they could basically get the tax benefits of owning short-term rentals and real estate in general. And while it was important for me to have that, on the flip side, we were getting 75% of the cash flow. They get their tax liability reduced, we get higher cash flow, win-win for everybody. Strategy number 3, I've probably given you like more than 3, but this is just your traditional 50-50 partnership, all right? There's a couple of different ways that you can do this, but let's talk through it. So one example of just a straight 50-50 partnership is you put in 50% of the cash, your partner puts in 50% of the cash, you go and you get a loan together and you run this as a business. Most straightforward version of a partnership. But sometimes you walk into a partnership where you may have a ton of cash, but you got bad DTI, debt to income ratio, you may have bad credit, but your partner has really great borrowing power. And so you may be able to walk into an arrangement where you say, hey, Caleb, let's go in on a loan together. I'm gonna bring the cash, you're gonna bring the borrowing power. And that's sort of one of the really cool symbiotic ways that you can work with somebody. It doesn't have to be 50-50. I mean, I think there's a few ways you can do it. I think you can say, hey, I'll bring 75% of the cash, you bring 25% of the cash, but you bring the borrowing power. I also think that's fair, right? There's a few ways that you can slice a 50-50 partnership, or you may even be in a scenario where you say, hey, I've got a lot of money, congrats, good for you, must be nice, but I have no time. And this actually goes into that first model we talked about. But you bring on a partner who has a ton of time, but maybe not a lot of money. Maybe your partner can bring all the money for the furnishing so that they have a little bit of skin in the game, and you just approach it as a 50-50 partnership. I've done this several times in my portfolio too. Again, no right or wrong here, it just really depends on the person, right? If you're friends with somebody and you're walking into a partnership, you may want it to be a little bit more equitable so that there's no dissonance or no resentment or anything like that. But when I'm working with just like an investor that I don't know and it's purely business, then at that point, that's when I can be a little bit more stringent and hardline in certain terms that I want, right? With someone that I know I'm partnering up with, I'm not really trying to lay down the law in negotiations. Like I want it to be fair for everybody. And of course I want that for an investor too, but an investor is watching out for their best interest and you're watching out for your best interest. And so there's always a little bit more negotiation that may go on with an investor that you're not super acquainted with. So, okay, so that's effectively 3 ways I've structured partnerships. One where I bring no money. And I will say that on that one, that became my most popular model because investors would come to us and we would basically say, you pay for everything. And on top of that, we're going to charge you what used to be a 7% management fee. We now charge more, but we would say, hey, you bring the money, you bring the borrowing power, we're going to run it. And then we're going to charge a 15% management fee so that we are making money along the way because it does take work to manage these properties. But this was easily our most popular method. And then you have the waterfall method. In this instance, at 25/75, where you pay back your investor first, they get 75% of the cash flow profits. And once they're paid back on their initial investment, that waterfall basically drops to a 50-50 equity and profit stake. And then of course, there's the last one we just talked about, the 50-50, a little bit more traditional. Partner brings in 50% of the money, you bring 50% of the money. Your partner brings all the borrowing power, however you want to work it out, but you're basically 50-50 partners on the property that you purchase. So there are going to be a lot more nuts and bolts to something like that. But actually what I'm starting to move towards now more and more these days is just basically straight debt where I pay an investor back a percentage on their money. So for example, an investor says, hey Rob, I got 100 grand. Instead of me saying, great, let's put that 100 grand into this property. You're going to finance it. We own this property 50-50. I always have to report back to that investor. There's a lot more communication. There's nothing wrong with this method because I've done it a lot of times. What I would prefer to do is say, hey, great, thank you, John, the investor. What I'll do is I'll take that $100,000 and I'll pay you 10% on that money over the course of a year, and that balance will balloon at the end of a year. So in that instance, 10% of $100,000 is $10,000. I'd effectively be paying that investor interest only, $833 a month. And then on month 12, that balance would balloon. And not only will I have paid them $10,000 in interest, I got to pay them $100,000 back. So what's an instance in which that model works? There's actually a few. This would be like if you want to flip a house, for example, and you want to get hard money. A lot of the times hard money lenders require you to bring a down payment for them to lend you the money. So you're basically taking investor cash and you're taking that investor cash and you're using it as a down payment on a hard money loan, and then you're using that hard money loan to flip the house. And then you sell the house, make a profit, pay back the hard money lender, pay back your investor. Of course, you will have paid interest doing this, but theoretically, if you ran the numbers and calculated everything correctly, you will have made a profit, and thus the interest is hopefully nominal compared to the profit that you make. That's one way that you can do this. That's a more common way that I see people utilizing OPM, other people's money. What's really tempting about this model in particular is that the investor gets no equity, no skin in the game, and typically when you work with an investor like this, they're not charging you points, right? So if you go to a hard money lender and you say, hey, I want to flip this $500,000 house, they're going to say, great, you need to bring 20% down. I mean, there's different options out there, but let's say you need to bring 20% down. We're going to let you borrow $400,000, but we're going to charge you 2 points on that. 2 points are 2 percentage points on that $400,000 balance is $8,000. So you'd basically have to pay $8,000 on that loan just to originate it, on top of the 10 to 12% interest that you're paying that hard money lender. Now, in an ideal scenario, best case scenario, you could raise the money and pay an investor 10% debt on $500,000, and you never have to even go to the hard money lender. You can just work straight with an investor, pay them no points, pay them interest. They're happy to make 10% on their money. You sell your home, you make a profit, you guarantee it with the promissory note. There's, talk to a lawyer about how you want to do that. This is the simplest way that you can use OPM, other people's money, to advance like your house flipping business. So now you're probably wondering, how can I use OPM to fund a real estate purchase that you don't necessarily want to flip and you want to hold long term? So there are a couple ways that you can do this, but it's a little tougher because it'll cost you some interest to do it this way. But if you go and you raise money from an investor, it's not necessarily super easy for you to then deposit that money in your account and go buy a home, right? Like most banks are going to see that as a red flag. They're going to say, hey, where'd you get this money from? And then you explain, oh, I borrowed it from this investor. And they're like, oh, you're in debt there. And it's like a bunch of red flags. Typically, the best way to utilize OPM is hopefully you already have the money. You have the money to qualify for the home, but maybe the home needs $100,000 or $150,000 in renovations, like light cosmetic touch-ups. Maybe you want to install pretty expensive amenities like hot tubs, a pickleball court, whatever it is, right? And then maybe you need to also fund the furnishings. So if all of that comes out to, let's say, $150,000, you can go and borrow that from a private money lender, and you'd want to make sure that the monthly payments on that, on top of all of the monthly payments of the mortgage itself, all pencil rental out in a way that still makes you a profit every single month. This gets pretty advanced. You wanna make sure that you're analyzing correctly. You wanna make sure that you're analyzing conservatively, because at the end of the day, you have a fiduciary responsibility to pay back all of your lenders. Otherwise, guess what? You're gonna get sued, and no one wants to get sued, right? So anyways, that's one way you can do it. $100,000 or $200,000. You may be asking yourself, do people just have $100,000 to $200,000 of disposable income chilling in their bank accounts? And you'd be surprised, actually a decent amount of people do. There's actually this strategy that I've just been hearing more about. It's very funny. It's called HELOC arbitrage, all right? So if you go and you take out a HELOC, a home equity line of credit, which is basically a line of credit against the equity in your home, it gets super interesting because the interest rate on that, let's say, is 4 or 5%. A lot of people just have HELOCs. They have the option to pull money out of their equity, but they don't use them, right? So HELOC arbitrage is basically where someone lends you money from their HELOC. They're paying 5% interest on it, but you're paying them 10% interest. So they're actually making a 5% delta on money that they weren't using anyway. It's free money. It doesn't cost them anything for you to use it. And instead of just letting it sit there and collect dust, they're making 5% without having to actually take money out of their bank accounts. So this is a really popular strategy. I actually have a student that raises private money this way. He'll go to all of his friends and family and cousins and everybody, and he'll say, hey, if you have a HELOC, I'm gonna pay you 10, 11%, and you're gonna make 5% on your money for having done nothing. And in that instance, they own no equity. He has all these short-term rental property that he's cash flowing on, and he's built like a 10-unit portfolio that's making him tens of thousands of dollars every single month, which is really, really cool and a really smart way to utilize OPM. Woo! All right, are you with me? Was that a lot? I feel like it was a lot. I'm sorry. Watch that one again, and if it didn't make sense the first time, it probably won't make sense the second time because I feel like I was just rambling, but this is really just a little peek behind the curtains of how I've structured debt with so many people out there. And by the way, if you're someone that has like $1, $2, $3, $4, $500,000, $1 million just chilling in your bank account, and you're like, hey man, I'd like to make some interest on my money, it's not doing anything right now, let me know. I'll leave a link in the description down below for how you can invest with me. Before I end this video, I just wanted to quickly cover how you can get private money, right? I think this is the question that a lot of people have. It's like, well, hey, the structures are cool, but how can I actually go out and get private money? I'd like to actually make a video about this if that's interesting to you. Let me know in the comments down below and I'll do a series on raising private money. But one tip that I just wanted to give you was if you're successful in the world of real estate or in the world of short-term rentals, put yourself out there, make content about it, post about it on Facebook, post about it on your Instagram, post about your successes and your victories, and stay humble. And I promise you that if you're crushing it in whatever niche you're in the real estate world, people will reach out to you. Most of the partners that I had approached me to partner up with me and offered me money before the Raw Built channel even existed. Yeah, that's right. It wasn't like I had this platform and then all of a sudden my friends wanted to partner. I partnered with people before I started a YouTube channel. So if it's possible for me, I know it's possible for you. And the only reason that they ever reached out was because I put myself out there. So if you're on this journey of real estate and you're building an empire, tell people. That's the only way that people will ever find out that you're actually having success in this world, okay? All right, I always say this is like a really random metaphor that I came up with the other day. But let's say, oh man, this is dumb. I'm gonna end it with the dumbest metaphor ever. Let's say that you open up a taco shop. I think you catch what I'm saying. Put yourself out there, make it known what you're doing, and I promise you, money will come and find you. Hopefully it helps in some capacity. We talk about raising money and scaling up your portfolio with other people's money quite often in Host Camp, my short-term rental mentorship program where we have over 100 calls every single year that cover things like how to design, how to finance, how to optimize, how to automate your short-term rentals. And so if you're interested in joining that and joining my community of over 1,600 students, you can book a free call over at hostcamp.com and we'll see if we can help you. Otherwise, I'll catch you on the next episode of Raw Built. Okay, I'm hungry now. I'm gonna go get tacos. So, all right, see ya.